Welcome to the channel for the first time viewers. Welcome back from my existing subscribers. Today I want to go over a poll, some opinions, a couple of things, right? So I want to talk about, let's start with the 11900K and how it has been received. That chip is the brand new Intel flagship. It's i9 processor, 8 cores, which I was like, why? And 16 threads. So it's retailing for about $550 if you go to Best Buy, but typically you'll see it for about $615 in most retailers. Now, what I will say about that is that in some games, it performs a little bit better. In most games, it does not perform as well as the chip that came before it, and it does less at the expense of 2 cores. So instead of being a 10-core processor, they went down to 8 cores. Now the single, I think it's the single and the boost speed is higher than the 10900K, but you can also overclock your 10900K to kind of match that or be right in line with it. So I don't know. It's a weird time that we are living in. But that's a good thing. So you can grab a better gaming chip, in my opinion, which is the 10900K for less money. It's about $400, and then there's a version of that chip, another i9, which is it's called the 10850K, and it's a little bit slower. It's like literally a little bit slower, like 100 megahertz, to the point where it probably won't even make a difference in your games. But that one I have seen as low as $330. So think about the difference in what you can afford if you were to build something right now, and you had to spend $530 or $550 for an 1100K or 11900K versus $330 for something that outperforms it in some games and barely loses in others. And for multi-threaded workloads, it outperforms it. And then you can also get a better motherboard. You can get better memory. You can there's so much more with that $200, $220 that you can throw it into. You can pretty much chalk up the difference in some of these cards that are scalped. And if you think about it that way, like you can pay the difference for a 3060 Ti versus going with a 3060 if you were to see it online. But yeah, so that is on the Intel side. That's what's kind of going on. And on the AMD side, I went from a Ryzen 7 5800X, or actually I did have the 5800X for a little bit. Long story short, I went from 3800X to the 5800X. It's finally available on AMD.com. And then I was like, okay, I'll hold on to this until I get a chance to get a Ryzen 9 because I love the experience from an i9. Right, so that's kind of what opened up my eyes to the i9s and the Ryzen 9s, and now I just like that's what I would prefer to buy if I'm ever in a situation to buy again, right? So then I think it was like a week later into having the 5800X, 5900X came available online, and it ended up being like $60 more than buying it retail. So I went ahead and I switched it out for that. Now, what I will say is that on the AMD side, I did run a poll a couple weeks ago, and it was more about what is your perception of AMD? Like, what do you think about it? Is it a lesser brand? Do you think it's the perception of it has improved? Because to me, since the Ryzen 3000 series, I feel like gaming, it's been really good, and then productivity, it was always better in like most things except Adobe. From benchmarks, I don't use Adobe products, so I couldn't tell you firsthand, but from benchmarks, looked like Intel because of QuickSync was a little bit better. Now with this poll, 20% of people said they still think of AMD as a lesser brand than Intel. 48%, which was the biggest number, the AMD perception has increased in their eyes. And then we had 8% of voters say, it didn't matter. They didn't really care. And then the other 24% just wanted to click on and see what everybody else said. So it's kind of like you always want to give that option, I feel like, so that you don't skew the numbers so people are just voting on something random so they can see what the results are. So really 20% of people think it's less. 48% of the voters think it's better. And then 8 with no difference in opinion. So for me, looking at the Ryzen 9 5900X, I think that's the clear-cut winner when it comes to gaming performance. It's $550, so you now have this, not dilemma, but do you go with the Ryzen 9 5900X and get those extra few frames, or do you save a couple $100 at this point and get a 10850K? It's a crazy time that we're in, but overall, I think that the Ryzen is a solid platform. It's at the end of the rope right now. We're still waiting to see what's going to happen with AM4 and see what happens with the next generation of Ryzen, because this was supposed to be the last one that is supported on this particular motherboard style. Whereas if you've been buying Intel, you kind of know that every couple years it changes, right? So every couple years you gotta get a new board when you upgrade your CPU because they change the socket. But with AMD, I could be, technically I could still have been using the same board that I had with my Ryzen 5 1400 when I first converted to PC gaming back in 2018 on a new chip today. So that's kind of crazy that, you know, that type of longevity and that's that same consistency. So I like that. Obviously, new features wouldn't be available on the board, and you're definitely not going to be overclocking these new chips on an old board. But if you just needed it to just run stock, get a new CPU, kind of like a new pair of shoes, not even use it to its full potential, but have it for future use, the option was there. Whereas on Intel, it just wasn't there. So with that, I don't know, man. It's like it's a tough call. It's a tough call. If I was recommended to a friend and both were in stock right then and there, I would probably lean more towards getting the AMD and spending a little bit more money. You get better gaming performance, you get more cores, so you're getting 12 cores. And if you look at the 11900K, you're getting 12 versus 8. So in multi-threaded performance tasks, it's just not. It's not. I don't think it's in the same ballpark because this is a very big difference. You're looking at 16 threads versus 24. And games like Warzone like extra threads because they go real heavy on the CPU. So if you're into games that are CPU intensive, the AMD is faster in games. It's faster in multi or in actual workstation tasks. So they really, if the money wasn't the immediate thing that you were concerned about, then the AMD is gonna be better. Now, if you flip the coin and you're like, what's the best system I could build for my dollar? It would be a 10th generation i9 because you definitely want that. I wouldn't say the i7 is a bad purchase, but the i9 is going to give you that extra oomph. It's going to take your dollar that much further down the line. So imagine being back in like 2018, the 9900K was the IT card, right? And essentially, if you have bought or the IT CPU, if you have bought, man, I said bought, damn, I'm crazy. Anyways. I'm getting sidetracked. If you purchased the 9900K when it was brand new, you would essentially be in a situation where you're getting like 10, 15 FPS less, maybe, in some games than a CPU that's coming out this year as a flagship. It has the same amount of cores as yours, and you probably would look at it and be like, I don't really need to upgrade, right? Versus if you were to get the i7, that one back then didn't even have hyper-threading, so it was 8 cores, 8 threads, which is why I got rid of my 9700K. But yeah, that's the difference that you're looking at. So being able to pick up a 10850K for $330 or a 10900K, which I think I saw for like $410. I mean, to me, that's a no-brainer. I would go with that if the money was what you were trying to save. If you were trying to get the best 5950X or 5900X, and I just wouldn't rock with the 11900K. You know, I couldn't do it. If an opportunity comes up, maybe to run some benchmarks, I might get it to kind of see what that would look like. But I can't really see myself getting rid of my 10900K because I would always have that feeling in the back of my head, knowing that I probably got rid of something that was better than what I just bought, and it was a pointless upgrade. You know what I mean? Like if I were to build a third rig, then I would probably look into getting that. But let me know your thoughts about the 11900K launch, what you thought about some of the benchmarks, because it was just really weird to see like a $615 or a $550 to $615 chip getting beat out by chips that cost $330 now or $400. So I don't know, it's just weird, man. It's a weird time, like I said, that we're in, and the AMD has finally arrived. So next generation, we're gonna see what happens. I think Intel. I have this one last theory before I let y'all go. I have this theory that this was where Intel finally ripped off the Band-Aid, and they're gonna go off of the 14 nanometer plus process. So I'm not an expert in that, but I just keep noticing that AMD, every time they release a new CPU, it went from like 10 to 7 nanometer, and now there are talks that they're working on 5 nanometer. So their process just keeps getting more efficient, and Intel was hanging on to the performance gains, but they weren't really making the improvements to the process. So now I think they're going to rip off the Band-Aid, because this was like a weird mix of like a 10 nanometer kind of switched back and backported to 14 nanometer. Whatever that means, I'm just telling you stuff I've heard. So the process has been kind of reverse engineered to make it fit in this platform so they can sell it as is in this package, right? So I think they ripped off the Band-Aid. Next time around, with 12900K, I think you'll actually see some more improvements. I don't really like to speak too much on rumors, but there was a rumor that it's up to 50% more performant. So, I mean, AMD kept, they were pretty true to their word when they said it was about 21% more performant than the current Ryzen 3000 series. So it'd be interesting to see what actually happens at the end of this year when that releases, or if it releases on time, and we compare it to whatever Ryzen or AMD is offering then, which could be like a 5900 XT. I don't know. It could be something like that where Intel takes the lead, leapfrog by 5-10%, and then AMD just releases the XT version of the CPUs, and now it's even again. So you guys be easy. I'll catch you in the next video, and it's kind of like my thoughts on where AMD is kind of headed, and where Intel is kind of headed with this 11900K release. But I'm gonna catch y'all on the flip.